He grabs the controller, only to realize it's controlling him. He stares into the mirror, only to find you on the other side. He smashes the computer, then hears you laugh. Let's try again. It's 1984 in London. A young game developer is trying to adapt a choose-your-own-adventure novel into a video game. The book is called Bandersnatch. It has countless endings, but only one goal: to drive the creator insane and trap the viewer inside. You think you're playing the game, but you're part of it. This isn't your typical episode of Black Mirror. This is Bandersnatch, Netflix's first interactive film, and Charlie Brooker's most savage takedown of free will. And here's the kicker. Behind every branching path lies a more disturbing truth. You've never made a single real choice. Bandersnatch follows Stephen Butler, played by Finn Whitehead, a 19-year-old programmer obsessed with adapting a mind-bending novel written by a deranged author, Jerome F. Davies, into a branching path video game. But as the development deepens, so does Stephen's paranoia. Is he making his own decisions, or is someone or something making them for him? You guide Stephen through a series of seemingly simple choices. Take the job or don't. Take the pills or toss them. Follow Colin or stay put. But with each click, the walls get thinner and the mirror cracks wider. This isn't just a game. This is a trap designed in pixels and code. What Bandersnatch really offers is not control. It's the illusion of control. This is a meta-narrative machine that tricks you into thinking you're the player when you're just another character, watching Stephen question his freedom while your own finger hovers over the button, oblivious to your own programmed behavior. It doesn't just question his agency. It questions yours. And that's the real horror of Bandersnatch. It turns Netflix into a digital mirror, reflecting back a truth far more unsettling than any dystopia. You're following a script, too. Among all the endings, one stands out, a so-called golden path. In it, Stephen kills his father. The game becomes a critical success. Years later, the story is adapted by Pearl Rittman, Colin's daughter, into a Netflix interactive film. Sound familiar? This isn't a time loop. It's a generational curse disguised as innovation. 3 creators: Jerome, Stephen, Pearl. 3 breakdowns. 1 repeating question. Why does getting closer to creative freedom always end in madness? Why do those who see the system most clearly get crushed by it? And why do we keep hitting replay, hoping for the one ending that makes sense? Bandersnatch doesn't answer these questions. It plants them. In your mind. In your choices. In your silence. Because in a world where everything is customizable, what's still truly yours? The illusion was engineered long before you watched. There's a certain irony in how Bandersnatch, a story about collapsing under the weight of too many choices, nearly collapsed under the same pressure during its creation. Originally, this wasn't meant to be an experiment. Charlie Brooker conceived the idea as a conventional episode for Black Mirror's 5th season. A self-aware game designer, a haunted source material, a descent into meta-narrative madness, it had all the right pieces for a high-concept, one-off nightmare. But the more Brooker wrote, the more he realized the form was betraying the content. A story about agency couldn't be told on rails. To critique the illusion of choice, the narrative itself had to simulate that illusion. In other words, if the viewer wasn't complicit, the story wouldn't work. At the time, Netflix had been quietly developing the infrastructure for interactive storytelling. Children's shows like Puss in Book had proven the technology could handle binary choices and seamless playback. But what the company wanted next was legitimacy, a proof of concept that didn't just amuse, but unnerved. Something that could anchor its technological ambition to cultural capital. Black Mirror, with its built-in cynicism and digital anxiety, was the perfect host organism. What followed was not filmmaking, it was systems engineering disguised as cinema. Brooker and director David Slade didn't write a script. They wrote a spreadsheet, a flowchart, a massive branching logic map with hundreds of paths, rewinds, trapdoors, and recursive loops. Narrative beats had to be modular, emotional arcs collapsible, scenes shootable in multiple tonalities to accommodate a dozen viewer decisions per node. Every story cell had to live on its own, yet build toward a consistent, coherent theme. And unlike a typical film, this one had to allow for self-sabotage. You had to be able to ruin the story, and that had to be part of the design. Production was punishing. Some days, Finn Whitehead shot 5 or 6 versions of the same breakdown, varying only in timing, volume, eye movement. He was no longer playing a role. He was performing variations on a pattern, like an actor trapped in a behavioral experiment. Will Poulter's Colin, part guru, part glitch, became the only character aware of the loop, and even his actor began to feel it. He would later cite the mental exhaustion from filming as a key reason for stepping back from the public eye. Behind the camera, it wasn't much better. Editors worked with nonlinear timelines spanning thousands of branching combinations. Sound designers had to ensure emotional continuity across paths that no single viewer would ever experience in the same order. The idea of a score became meaningless. There was no linearity to score against. Then came the question no one wanted to ask: what if the audience doesn't get it? What if they don't care? Netflix responded with metrics. They were ready to track every decision, every rewind, every rage quit. The film became a mirror not only for Stefan but for you. It was the first piece of content designed to watch you watching it, an entertainment product that harvested behavior in real time and incorporated that as meta-commentary. In early drafts, the system went even further. There were endings where viewers were forced to confront their own face in the screen, where the Netflix interface glitched into surveillance prompts, where the choice was not Stefan's but yours, to shut him down or let him suffer. Some of those moments were pulled, too invasive, too ethically ambiguous. But their DNA remains. Bandersnatch is not simply about Stefan losing control. It's about you discovering you never had it. So when people ask whether Bandersnatch was a game or a movie, the answer is simpler than it seems. It was a mechanism crafted by people who wanted to know what happens when you believe you're choosing, even when every outcome was already written. The project may have started as an episode. It ended as a thesis. Bandersnatch is designed to be read visually as much as narratively. Every color palette, every angle, every set detail whispers something about the nature of control, recursion, and the dissolution of personal autonomy. What separates it from other interactive stories is not just its branching logic, it's the way it encodes meaning into every sensory element, down to the flicker of a CRT screen or the placement of a book on a shelf. The film's dominant color temperature is a sickly yellow-white, reminiscent of early 80s office fluorescence. But this palette is routinely interrupted by deep blacks and sterile, cyan-tinted scenes, particularly during moments of surveillance, recursion, or decision paralysis. This visual disruption mirrors the experience of the protagonist, trying to build a coherent identity in a world that keeps glitching. The camera work reinforces this. When Stefan believes he's in control, the framing is centered, symmetrical, steady. But when the narrative diverges or he becomes aware of you, the viewer, Dutch angles, handheld shakes, and disorienting focus shifts dominate. These aren't just stylistic flourishes, they simulate a psychological state. The screen doesn't just show Stefan losing control. It becomes a participant in that process. Set design is perhaps the film's most underrated narrative tool. In Colin Rittman's flat, you'll find dog-eared copies of Philip K., Dick novels, a poster of Tron, and a whiteboard filled with game logic charts. These aren't Easter eggs. They are signals. This is a space where reality is negotiable. Later, in Stefan's own room, the layout subtly changes with each reset. Books disappear. Posters shift. Most viewers miss this. But the subconscious registers the instability. The world is rearranging itself, and Stefan doesn't know it yet. Even sound cues carry weight. Each major decision is punctuated by a deep, ambient swell that mimics the tension of an impending panic attack. The lo-fi synth score written to evoke a sense of tech anxiety and nostalgia never resolves into a melody. It loops, recycles, implodes. Much like Stefan's perception of his own life. In terms of character function, it's worth noting that Colin Rittman, played with twitchy brilliance by Will Poulter, isn't a side character. He's a living tutorial. His LSD-fueled monologue about Pac-Man, control, and alternate timelines is not just exposition. It's the metaphysical key to the entire film. Colin functions as the film's glitch, a character who knows he's in a simulation and tries and fails to exit the system. He's not your guide. He's your warning. Stefan, meanwhile, is a mirror. His descent is tailored by your decisions, but his emotional range is pre-written. He can only fall apart in a set number of ways, reinforcing the core thesis. The self is programmable, and in an interactive system, even rebellion is part of the game design. Together, Colin and Stefan represent a closed loop, the prophet who sees the trap but can't escape, and the subject who walks into it thinking he's the one choosing. And this, ultimately, is Bandersnatch's deepest symbol. Not the multiple endings, not the fourth wall breaks, not even the Netflix meta-joke. It's the architecture of the illusion, a perfectly built feedback loop where every expression of agency leads back to the cage. At its core, Bandersnatch is not a film. It's a simulation of choice, wrapped in the aesthetics of cinema. Traditional stories rely on arcs, beginnings, middles, ends. But Bandersnatch destroys that rhythm. It refuses catharsis. It weaponizes recursion. It turns the act of watching into an act of self-experimentation. Structurally, it mirrors the architecture of a video game decision tree. Each node offers a binary or branch path, some looping back, some ending abruptly, others opening entirely new zones of story. But it's more than a gimmick. It reflects the psychological tension of modern decision-making. The more choices appear, the less they mean. The deeper you go, the more the illusion cracks. This is not a branching story. It's a trap masquerading as freedom. Charlie Brooker exploits this trap with precision. Each loop reinforces Stefan's dissolution. Early on, your choices seem minor, Frosties or Sugar Puffs, a tape or a record. But each decision pulls Stefan deeper into a sense of lost agency, until even violent acts feel inevitable. You don't just witness his breakdown. You cause it. This narrative design reflects a philosophy. The self is not fixed. It is collapsible under feedback. Just like algorithms feed on interaction to refine themselves, Stefan becomes what you shape him to be. He is your reflection, but corrupted. Director David Slade brings this architecture to life with surgical bleakness. His previous work on Hannibal and Hard Candy reveals a consistent fascination with minds under duress and predators behind glass. But Bandersnatch departs from the cinematic violence of those works. Instead of blood, it offers interface. Instead of monsters, it presents menus. Horror becomes procedural. It's also a turning point for Brooker's authorship. Prior Black Mirror episodes, 15 Million Merits, White Bear, White Christmas, deal with systems that trap individuals. But Bandersnatch goes further. It implicates the audience as part of the system. You're not just watching Stefan get manipulated. You're watching yourself manipulate him. Critically, the episode sparked wildly divergent reactions. Some hailed it as genius, a storytelling breakthrough that blurred the line between creator and consumer. Others called it exhausting, shallow, or even exploitative. One debate centered on narrative agency. Was Netflix offering new forms of storytelling, or simply offloading authorship onto the audience under the guise of empowerment? Was this innovation, or a techno-corporate mirror maze? Another controversy emerged around violence. Several endings involved Stefan killing his father. Some viewers felt trapped into these paths. Others kept replaying them, curious about unseen outcomes. This raised a disturbing question. If a viewer knows they're causing harm to a fictional character but does it anyway, are they still just a viewer? Perhaps the most haunting thing about Bandersnatch is not what it shows us, but what it reveals about how we consume. How quickly we accept loops. How willingly we trade closure for control. How easily we treat choice like a game, while forgetting someone always designs the game board. The brilliance of Bandersnatch lies in its pretense. It offers interactivity, but it is, in fact, a parable about systemic entrapment. Every decision you make reinforces this truth. You are not liberating Stefan. You are confirming the system's control. You are, in essence, debugging the trap. This is where the film transcends meta-narrative trickery and enters the realm of political allegory. The system in Bandersnatch is not simply narrative design. It represents the silent machinery of modern life. Algorithms, surveillance, choice overload, gig economies, psychological gamification. Stefan is not just a character. He is a user, a worker, a son, an artist, trying to express himself within a structure that is built to override him. At the heart of the story is an impossible contradiction. Stefan is promised freedom, but every path has been written. Even rebellion is encoded. When he throws away his medication or kills his father or refuses to work with Tuckersoft, it feels like resistance. But the system responds, recalibrates, redirects, loops. The feedback is the design. This mirrors the anxiety of a generation trained to believe in self-expression, only to find their lives reduced to menus, ratings, and yes or no toggles. Stefan's father insists that his son has agency, that the computer isn't controlling him. But the father himself is part of the code. He is the comforting voice of liberal individualism in a deterministic maze. The real antagonist of Bandersnatch is not a person, but a logic structure, the architecture of choices so cleverly designed that you forget who built them. This is why the Netflix as controller ending is so unsettling, not because it breaks the fourth wall, but because it exposes the hand behind the illusion. The viewer becomes complicit. The film becomes surveillance dressed as freedom. Colin, the failed prophet, represents a tragic figure within this system. He sees the grid. He takes the LSD. He speaks the truth. But he still jumps. Awareness doesn't save him. Why? Because knowledge without leverage is not liberation. It's just a more vivid form of despair. Meanwhile, Stefan is devoured by the very thing he tries to control: his game, his past, his programming. The trauma of his mother's death isn't just backstory, it's part of the system's loop. You can try to undo it, rewrite it, go back in time. But the script absorbs your efforts and feeds them back to you as story branches. The past, in this architecture, is not a memory. It's a mechanism. This recursive fatalism becomes the moral engine of the film. You choose. You regret. You choose again. And at no point do you escape the grid. What's worse, at some point you stop wanting to. You start treating it as entertainment. Stefan's pain becomes a puzzle. His trauma becomes content. That is Bandersnatch's most terrifying idea, that even in suffering, the system finds utility. That even your empathy can be gamified. The most disquieting achievement of Bandersnatch is not that it created a new way to watch films, it's that it created a new way to distance the viewer from moral consequence. It didn't just tell a story. It made you test what kind of choices you'd make when no one was watching. And it recorded your answer. Reactions to the film range from ecstatic praise to subtle discomfort to outright aversion. Some viewers relished the interactivity. Others recoiled from what it made them do. The split wasn't just artistic, it was existential. For some, Bandersnatch offered empowerment. They could shape a narrative, experiment with structure, explore multiple outcomes. For others, the act of choosing, especially when it came to violence, felt like complicity. A few viewers even reported guilt loops, returning to the film again and again to find a version of Stefan's fate they could live with. But that's the trap. No ending in Bandersnatch is morally satisfying. Even when Stefan survives or finds creative success, it comes with death, madness, or erasure. The system never rewards you for doing the right thing. It merely reshuffles the illusion. The effect is profound. Viewers begin to internalize that morality within this system is irrelevant. The only goal becomes completion, curiosity, closure. Empathy fades into the background. This speaks to a deeper societal reflex, our increasing comfort with simulation over consequence. On streaming platforms, in social media feeds, in games, we make choices that feel real but exist in sealed environments. Bandersnatch holds a mirror to this and dares to ask, when your decisions stop matching ethically, what kind of self do you become? More troubling still is the question of responsibility. Who is to blame for Stefan's suffering? The developers? The system? The viewer? Brooker never answers this directly. That's the point. The power structure is distributed, and the violence is diffused. No single entity claims responsibility because the system was built to dissociate action from consequence. This diffusion mirrors the way modern tech platforms operate. Algorithms hurt people, but no engineer is responsible. Content spreads harm, but no user is to blame. It's the system. It's the interface. It's the math. In Bandersnatch, moral detachment is both the engine and the product. There's also an ethical question at the heart of the film's construction. By designing Stefan's suffering as a playable scenario, the film commodifies trauma. It presents a person's breakdown as something replayable, rewindable, explorable. Is that innovation or exploitation? Brooker may argue that the film's self-awareness protects it. But the truth is, awareness doesn't erase effect. Bandersnatch may be ironic, but its loops still seduce. Its pain still entertains. And so, the ethical line blurs. The viewer is both player and voyeur. The system is both platform and prison. The film is both critique and participation. And ethics. In Bandersnatch, ethics doesn't vanish. It just becomes optional. What makes Bandersnatch so unsettling is not that it predicts the future, but that it reflects the present so accurately that we mistake it for fiction. The interactive interface, the gamified trauma, the manufactured sense of agency, it's all already here. Not in a speculative dystopia, but in your browser, your feed, your apps, your daily life. We live inside decision trees. Every algorithm you encounter, from Netflix's own recommendation engine to Google search results to social media curation, is a branching path system designed to limit friction, not increase freedom. You're offered options. You pick. But the options were curated, ranked, weighted, and nudged long before you arrived. Bandersnatch doesn't invent this mechanic. It merely exposes it. And it reveals something else, too, that our obsession with customization, our craving to choose our own path, has been weaponized by platforms. Every Spotify playlist, every TikTok swipe, Every For You page is calibrated to reinforce what you already want. Over time, this creates not freedom, but a feedback loop masquerading as autonomy. Just like Stefan, we believe we're making independent choices. But in truth, we are clicking on predefined branches in someone else's flowchart. This raises the most crucial question Bandersnatch hints at. In a world designed around user engagement, how do you know which choices are truly yours? Real-world parallels are everywhere. Emotional personalization engines are being tested for online therapy bots. Sentiment analysis tools predict your political alignment. Smart cities are building predictive policing systems. The code is already writing futures, and not all of them will let you click go back. Even the structure of modern labor mirrors Stefan's dilemma. The gig economy promises freedom, yet delivers micromanaged workflow systems. You're your own boss, but the app tells you what to do, when, and how. Like Stefan, the illusion of agency collapses the moment you try to do something the system didn't anticipate. And just as Bandersnatch gamifies trauma, so too does the internet. Viral videos of breakdowns. Algorithms surfacing tragedy for engagement. The spectacle of suffering has become a monetizable feedback object. You don't need Netflix's interface to loop pain. Your feed already does that. The lesson isn't that technology is evil. It's that systems built for optimization will always reshape the self around compliance unless we actively resist. In this light, Bandersnatch is no longer fiction. It's a training module for living in late-stage algorithmic culture. It doesn't warn us about a future to come. It trains us to see the structure we're already inside of. In 1985, Neil Postman published Amusing Ourselves to Death, a prophetic critique of television culture and how it reduces serious discourse to entertainment. Nearly 4 decades later, Black Mirror, Bandersnatch stands as a chilling echo of Postman's core thesis. Only this time, the medium is not television but interactive entertainment, and the crisis is no longer passive consumption but participatory erosion. Postman's warning was simple but damning. We weren't going to be destroyed by Big Brother, but by our own addiction to amusement. While George Orwell feared the suppression of information, Postman argued that Aldous Huxley was right. We drown in irrelevance, too entertained to care, too distracted to resist. Bandersnatch internalizes this anxiety, but mutates it. It doesn't simply entertain us into apathy. It tricks us into thinking we're active, even morally engaged. It lets us feel like participants, but only inside a system that ensures our choices are hollow. Postman feared the erosion of meaning through form. Bandersnatch takes it one step further. It creates the illusion of meaning as form. Where Postman saw television as a medium that could only trivialize serious ideas by demanding everything be entertaining, Bandersnatch offers a darker inversion. It gamifies suffering, then lets the viewer believe they're engaging with ethical content. It's no longer the decline of discourse, it's the perversion of participation. The book's most haunting dichotomy, Orwell versus Huxley, is not only embedded in Bandersnatch, it's collapsed. We're monitored and manipulated, Orwell, but we also love the system that does it, Huxley. The controller is in your hand, and the jail is inside your smile. Moreover, Postman warned that form reshapes truth. That each medium doesn't merely deliver content, it defines what kind of truth is possible. In Bandersnatch, the truth is always conditional, modular, and replayable. There's no singular truth, just a content architecture. This aligns directly with Postman's anxiety. When truth becomes too malleable, it ceases to anchor meaning. Choice becomes aesthetic. Ethics become optional. Even more disturbingly, Bandersnatch introduces a feedback loop that Postman only theorized. It lets the system learn from the user. Netflix collects your choices, times your responses, predicts your rewatch paths. Your entertainment becomes a data trail, and your preferences help reinforce the illusion of control. This wasn't possible in the TV era Postman critiqued. Television broadcasted. It didn't adapt. But Bandersnatch is television that learns. And in doing so, it completes the circle Postman feared. We don't just watch entertainment. Entertainment now watches back. In Postman's world, the threat was that we'd laugh ourselves into ignorance. In Bandersnatch, the threat is that we'll game ourselves into compliance, clicking deeper into loops we mistake for agency. So what has changed? Postman's critique was linear. TV makes us stupid. Bandersnatch reveals a recursive structure. Interactive media doesn't just erode attention. It simulates moral action, then uses our engagement as proof that we want more of it. And we do. We watch again. We try to unlock more endings. We treat trauma as story mechanics. And we keep clicking. The tragedy is not that we are entertained. The tragedy is that we are entertained while believing we're in control. The impact of Bandersnatch didn't end when the credits rolled. If anything, the structure ensured that it never truly ended. Its looping narrative bled into the culture, spawning discussions, memes, academic essays, and even interface parodies. It wasn't just a film. It became a format to be mimicked, debated, and deconstructed. Shortly after release, Bandersnatch memes flooded social platforms. Users joked about not being able to decide breakfast cereal, tagged friends as Colin or Stefan, and created choose-your-own-path memes for everything from dating advice to depression spirals. The meta-commentary became communal. Everyone was stuck in their own loop, and the internet laughed nervously together. But beyond humor, universities began including Bandersnatch in curricula for digital narrative, interactive design, and even ethics. It became a touchstone for conversations on algorithmic determinism, platform psychology, and participatory media theory. The Netflix ending, where Stefan learns he's a character in a streaming service, is now regularly cited in academic papers on fourth-wall collapse and corporate self-reflexivity. Independent creators built tools to map the film's decision tree, even creating flowcharts to find secret endings. Some fans reverse-engineered Netflix's interaction code to better understand how user input was tracked and evaluated. In this way, Bandersnatch inadvertently exposed the opacity of user data interfaces. If you're looking to explore Bandersnatch's themes more deeply, here are a few companion works that mirror its philosophical and emotional concerns. Films to watch. Coherence 2013. A dinner party goes quantum when a comet passes overhead, creating overlapping realities. Why? Explores reality instability and subjective agency. The Congress, 2013. An aging actress sells her digital likeness to a studio that commodifies her forever. Why? Satire on digital identity, control, and corporate authorship. Stay 2005. A psychological thriller where timelines fracture and reality is questioned. Why? Echoes the psychological breakdown of Stefan through surreal structure. Time Crimes 2007, a Spanish sci-fi thriller involving time loops and moral decay. Why? Examines cause, consequence, and recursive self-destruction. Books to read. You Are Not a Gadget by Jaron Lanier. Why? A powerful critique of software culture and the dehumanization of identity in the digital age. The Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debord. Why? Philosophical underpinning of how images mediate and control modern social life. Choose Your Own Adventure. Philosophy and interactive fiction. Why? Academic collection examining choice, free will, and narrative design. In the wake of Bandersnatch, the line between story and system feels thinner. What we choose to consume, and how we are led to choose it, has become a central ethical and creative question of our age. As Colin Rittman once said, "You're just a puppet. You think you're in control, but you're not. It's a fucking nightmare." But let's reinterpret that line. What if Bandersnatch wasn't just calling Stefan a puppet? What if it was addressing you? What if the nightmare isn't in the story, but in your readiness to press continue? What makes Bandersnatch unforgettable isn't the structure or even its endings. It's that eerie sense of participation in something that feels both designed and personal. That moment when you laugh after making Stefan kill his father. That moment when you reset the story not to save him, but to unlock more content. That moment when pain became interface. So here's the question. If Bandersnatch gave you the option to free Stefan by never playing the game, would you still press play? And here's another. If you were the character and your life had a flowchart, how many of your decisions would truly be your own? The power of Bandersnatch lies in its trap. It doesn't punish you. It lets you punish yourself. Then it lets you laugh about it. It doesn't offer salvation. It offers agency-shaped entertainment and makes you think that's the same thing. In the end, maybe the most honest thing Bandersnatch ever did was show you the menu. You chose. You always would. If you watch this far, leave a comment with one emoji that best describes your mental state after watching Bandersnatch. Let's see how many endings this comment section can unlock.